Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse, episode 19. Today is Monday, March the 5th, 2014. My name is Graham Perro, and with me as always are Tyler Fitch and Melissa Daphne. We have the Q&A app running on Google+, so head on over there and ask some questions or leave us some comments, and we will get to them during the show. Easy way to find that page is to go to facebook.com/laxpodcast, LAX podcast. And the link to the Google Plus page is there. And so moving on, first week of the playoffs. I can't say I've heard of this one before. Mammoth goalie Dylan Ward had his goalie equipment stolen. Now I don't know if he was storing it outside his house, but it sounded like it was outside of his house and was stolen. I don't know, like I said, if he was storing it there or if he just kind of left it there for a short while. But somebody took it, and he never got it back. According to the Mammoth website, when they reported it, most goalies in the NLL only have one set of equipment, so it's not like he could just use his spare. So luckily, the Vancouver Stealth came to his rescue and loaned him some equipment. Ethan Iannucci picked it up from Vancouver and took it with him to the game, and it seemed to work out okay. It's kind of a interesting story. Not that we'd have an awful lot to talk about, but there was one thing that I thought was interesting in the press release or the article about the Stealth loaning them the equipment. The Mammoth specifically said that a number of other teams also offered some goalie equipment for them, but they specifically made a point of saying Calgary was not one of them, which I thought was kind of funny. But then I thought about it some more and thought it wasn't. I don't think it was a terribly classy thing to say for the Mammoth, because quite honestly, they already said most goalies only have one set of equipment. So how is Calgary going to help by giving them some equipment? I mean, they're not going to give him Mike Poulin's equipment. They're not going to give him Frankie Sigliano's equipment. What else is there? So unless they're expecting the Roughnecks to go buy some equipment to loan to them, I don't think they could have expected anything from Calgary. So that kind of didn't make any sense to me. And I saw a couple of comments on Facebook from fans as well saying, "Oh, way to go, Calgary! That was a really classy move," and these kind of sarcastic things. Well, I'm not sure what they were expecting exactly.
I don't think if I was playing the team that I would want them to lend me equipment anyway. I mean, that would just be kind of weird. Even if they could, do you really want to borrow equipment from your opponent? And not to mention, Ward is a big guy. Like, I think there's very few players' equipment he could have even borrowed.
Yeah, he maybe have picked up Matt Roy, who's similar height. Maybe that was a factor. But also, if you're getting gear from your opponent, you're going to measure it twice because goalie gear is so finicky. You're like, here, take this, use this, trust us. If it's close in the fourth, don't worry about it. Just use this gear.
I hadn't thought about the legality of the equipment issue, but that's certainly something. This is the one that's closest to illegal, so let them use this one, and maybe it'll expand a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I don't think that was very classy to put that in because it's, like you said, if every goalie really only has one set of equipment, then they don't have any to lend, and two, they're your direct competition this weekend. You're going to want equipment from everybody else but them, and they're not going to want to give it to you. I mean, they don't want to make it easier for you. So yeah, that's just childish, anyone that's calling Calgary out on that.
I did ask the Vancouver guy on Twitter, the Vancouver Stealth Twitter account, if there wasn't just a little bit of, hey, here's a way that we can help beat Calgary, seeing as Vancouver and Calgary have this bit of a rivalry. But I guess Vancouver has a rivalry with Colorado as well, so either way. Anyway, moving on to the games of the week, and of course there was only two. And I wonder if this will be the grumpiest podcast we've ever done, seeing as Tyler's team was already out, and now mine is out, and now Melissa's is out. So all of us are Not exactly disinterested observers from here on in, but none of us have as much of a rooting interest as we did before. Buffalo 15, Toronto 13. Buffalo's a team that lost 8 in a row going into this game, and quite honestly, they didn't look like it. I don't know how much preparation Troy accordingly had for them. I imagine they were revamping things here and there, because obviously the game plan that they had been going with for the past couple of months wasn't working, so they must have changed something. I thought both teams played pretty well. There were a few mental mistakes, a couple of avoidable penalties for the Rock. The one thing I noticed, less than a minute in, Cam Woods takes a holding penalty and is sent to the box, and this was just a dumb penalty. There was no reason for it. And I think shortly after that, and I can't remember the details, shortly after that there was another Rock penalty, and I remember thinking, don't tell me that they've taken a page out of the Bandits handbook and they're going to start killing themselves with dumb penalties. Luckily that didn't continue until about 5 minutes left in the game. I don't think it was even 5. I don't remember now. Oh, I wrote it down. 3 minutes left in the fourth. I believe it was Scott Johnston who took another dumb, unnecessary holding penalty. And when you're down by 2 with a couple of minutes left in a playoff game, the last thing you want to do is take dumb penalties. And I have a distinct memory of calling Scott Johnston out on this last year or the year before last, when he took a dumb penalty with 2 minutes left in a playoff game as well. And I think Scott Johnston has had a really good year. He's played really well this year, cutting down on the dumb penalties. He just happened to take a really dumb one at a really bad time. So that certainly didn't help the Rock. What also didn't help the Rock was the fact that Ryan Benesh was just on fire. Everything he shot seemed to go in. He was just unbelievable. And I remember thinking a few times during this game, what exactly did we trade did we receive when we traded Benesh? Ironically, one of the other guys that we traded with Benesh was Derek Suddens, who is also on the Bandits and also had a pretty decent game. I did hear some people near me talking about Brandon Miller and how it was his fault, and Cosmo's making the saves and Miller's not making the saves, and that's the difference in the game. And I wouldn't blame Miller for this one. He didn't have a fantastic game, but he wasn't bad. I mean, he did allow 15 goals, so you can't say he was great. But when Ryan Benesh is standing right in front of you on the edge of the crease by himself, and there's no defenders within 5 feet of him, and he's got a couple of seconds to decide where to shoot it, that's not Miller's fault, and he's going to score 9 out of 10 of those times. So, and I think that happened. I think 3 of the first 4 Buffalo goals were like that. They managed to split the defense. Somebody standing right in front of Brandon Miller with the ball, and there's just nothing he can do about that. What else did I want to say about that one? Casey Byrnes was the Toronto star of the game with 4 goals, and he played pretty decent, but he also missed a bunch of passes. There was a number of times where some sort of cross-crease pass came to him, and he just plain missed it. Now, I guess 1 or 2 of those were sort of a quick sticks kind of thing, and he only had a half a second to realize that the ball was coming and get his stick in place, and so he missed a couple of those. But some of the other ones looked like he just wasn't paying attention and just missed the ball. So he was hot or cold. He was either doing really well or just missing passes entirely. So that was a little weird. And one other stat from this game that was interesting, and Tyler confirmed this just a few minutes ago. This was Anthony Cosmo's first ever playoff win. And considering how good a goalie he's been and for how long, that seems unbelievable to me. But there it is. And another one is that Brandon Miller has also never won in the playoffs. And obviously that goes for at least 1 more year. Melissa, did you see this one?
I did. I watched all but maybe the last couple minutes of it. Once I knew the game was pretty much set score-wise. It was an interesting game. I was very surprised with Buffalo's play. As we said, they were on an 8-game losing streak, and I guess if you're going to break that, the playoffs is the time to do it. They looked pretty solid. I felt like Toronto looked a little sloppy on some of the basic stuff that we've been kind of talking about lately, just the sloppy passes, things like that. And both goalies I thought were making some pretty good saves, and I do think it's crazy that this is Cosmo's first. According to the announcers, he was 0-7 going into this, and it is kind of crazy. But some goalies just seem to crumble in the playoffs. They just try so hard that they fall apart. So maybe he's just been one of those. But Benesh had just a crazy game. I mean, pretty much all of Buffalo's offense was Ryan Benesh. I mean, in the third, he had 6 of their 10 goals, and he ended up getting 7 of the 15. So when you have one player knocking out the goals like that, that's going to have an impact. So it was definitely an interesting game. Not the result I expected. I don't think a lot of people would have picked Buffalo to win. Simply, they were on an 8-game losing streak. I mean, you figure it's going to snap at some time, but it was still kind of strange that it was the playoffs that snapped. Did you watch this one, Tyler?
I was able to see the second half, and it was incredible watching Benesh just start firing and getting all his goals. The last time I remember him scoring 7 goals was in Everett when he was with the Swarm, and his stick got stolen that night by somebody, maybe a prankster from the Stealth. I don't know, but if he was aware of that, he probably took that stick and hit it very well after the game was over, so he can come out shooting again next week. The Cosmo victory, I wouldn't say it was 0-7 unless that, because in my mind, it goes back to the 2007 playoffs, Stealth at Colorado, overtime game, Stealth won, Cosmo played 45 minutes of it, and Aaron Bold played the remaining, 15 plus overtime, is what the stat book says. And it was interesting. So I assumed, because I remember the goalies had been switched out a few times. Like Cosmo got pulled early because Emma scored 7 goals early on in the first quarter. And then he came back in. And then he got pulled again. And so I think they switched twice, and Cosmo didn't return at the end, is the way the stat book looks to me. Because whoever's in cage on an overtime goal is going to get the win, and they gave the win to Bold. But I'm not certain of that. I think also I have it right here. The time they calculated was only 60 minutes of goalie time, and that's not quite right. No, it was 64 minutes. Okay. But like both goalies and both teams got switched out that game. It was pretty incredible. So you couldn't say he lost that game because the team won. So if that's one of his playoff games that it was an 0-7, it's like kind of like a nothing. And also he's been around 10 years starting. In 2005, he was definitely starting, maybe before that for the Stealth. That was the first year I started going. To get that long until his first playoff NLL victory is interesting. And the thought that he crumbles in the playoffs, though, if you look at the summertime, he's won multiple Mann Cups, and he's been the MVP of the Mann Cup tournaments. So he's been there in playoff situations, but the one-and-done format, I guess this doesn't favor him or the teams he's been on. So it's very interesting to see him finally get the first victory, even though he's been part of a team that's won in the playoffs. And then people kind of a little short-sighted or missing out in the summertime and be like, well, he just got his first victory. Can't believe it. What's the big deal about him? Well, watch him this summer. That was his big deal. And now he's got the first step to getting the NLL playoff victory and maybe get a run of it going. All right, Graham, what's next? That's my thoughts on it.
One more thing that I just want to mention about that game, and I kind of covered it in my Moneyballers column this morning, but just looking it over again, it's just this is one of these crazy stats that you don't really notice unless you're really looking for it, and that's basically what I do with the Moneyballers. But in the first half, Buffalo had the lead for most of it, but Toronto came back and tied it 3 times, and each time that the Rock tied it, the next goal was Ryan Benesh. And in the third quarter, the Rock actually took the lead twice, and each time the next goal was Ryan Benesh tying it up. So he had 3 goals that put the Bandits ahead by 1, and 2 that tied it up again after they were losing. And Then John Tavares put them ahead. Chad Culp with the winner. He had another goal in there that actually didn't count for. Actually, he had two more goals that didn't count in terms of putting them ahead or tying it. But when you talk about somebody taking the team on his back, that was certainly the quintessential example right there. The other game, I didn't see much of this when I saw the most of the fourth quarter and OT. And so when I started writing my little write-up about this game, I thought, wow, great goaltending at both ends, which was true for the fourth quarter. But when I looked over the game sheet from the second and third quarters, which featured 23 goals, obviously great goaltending was not the story of those two quarters. Tyler, did you see this one?
Yeah, this was a super exciting game to watch. I think I tweeted out in the second quarter, like, first team to play defense wins, which, it's not true, but it's the way it was starting to feel, and the third quarter carried that idea forward. Just so many goals back and forth, and in the fourth quarter, both teams flicked a switch and said, all right, we got to lock this down and get this victory. And one goal each. So, sorry. I think, the Mammoth took the lead 41 seconds into the quarter. So it kind of continued that third quarter pace. And then it just locked down, 9 minutes left. Curtis Dixon ties it at 15 and go another half a quarter without a goal. And that was until Sean Evans. Really reminded me of last year's playoff game with the Stealth in Calgary. I think that game was 13-14. Calgary came back and tied the game consistently. Well, Curtis Dixon really came back and tied the game consistently in the second half, but never got a lead. And in this game, there were points where Calgary had to lead. They're up 12-10 in the third. Colorado started battling back. But it had that great feel, great crowd. People were going crazy in Calgary. They called it the playoff party, and it was, you could see the atmosphere was great. They're really into it, and Calgary gave the fans a win. And for having these teams play this closely all season, it really continued that great rivalry that they've got going. I loved watching it. Probably the best game of the year I've seen. Melissa, what did you think of this?
I thought this game was kind of crazy. I mean, first quarter was kind of typical. In the second quarter, just with 7 goals apiece, was just holy cow. I was definitely surprised in the second quarter. There was actually three shorthanded goals, 2 for the Mammoth and 1 for Calgary. So Snyder and Cupido scored for the Mammoth, and then Dane Dobby for Calgary. And I think just that fact that you had 3 shorthanders in a game and they were all in the same quarter was just kind of random. I thought that the first half the Mammoth played a little rusty. There was a lot of dropped passes, in my opinion. There was just a lot of, they weren't getting the loose balls. They were aggressive, and in the first half, kind of the run down shoot seemed to work for them, but they weren't getting the rebounds. Calgary seemed to be getting the rebounds, and they were getting multiple shots off each time, whereas the Mammoth, it was like just one and done, and it was changed back over, which was really frustrating. In the second half, it was different, but I got really frustrated in the fourth quarter. It didn't surprise me that Calgary won, because in the fourth quarter, the Mammoth were playing the last 5 minutes or so like they were defending a lead, whereas Calgary, you could just see that aggression. They were hitting hard, and they're like, okay, no, we're going to get this goal, we're going to get it, we're going to get it, we're going to get it, and they weren't able to until overtime. But they just had this aggression that the Mammoth just didn't have. To me, the Mammoth were just, it was like they were sitting on a lead they didn't have. And so it was very frustrating. And, it's those little things, like, since John Grant Jr. is the big, guy, every key play runs through him, and even if he's getting double coverage, things like that, they still pass to him. And it's like, it'd be nice if they changed it up a little while, once in a while, so that John Grant Jr. wasn't always that key guy for them to go through, because that's what everybody's expecting, and that's exactly what they do every time. So when he can't get it done, they try and force it again, and it's like it just doesn't work. I definitely had a few frustrations. I thought Dylan Moore did really well considering he was wearing borrowed gear, because I know that would make a lot of goalies just kind of fall apart because the gear doesn't feel right. That's just one more stressor in addition to the whole playoff stuff. So I could have seen that actually making him have a really bad night, and he stepped up and did well. A lot of the goals that Calgary was scoring were unscreened shots. I mean, it looked like the overtime goal was kind of on a screen too, so you can't really fault him for that too much. One thing I did find just obnoxious as all, and the fact that Todd LaBranche was the head ref, it shouldn't surprise me, the inconsistency on delay of game calls. You know, apparently Mammoth came out late. They're saying nobody told them it was time. Of course, the other side's saying they did. Penalty was called. I have been in 3 Mammoth games this season in the Pepsi Center where the team showed up after the entire thing has, like names have been called. Everyone's sitting, literally waiting like, hello, where are you? It's been 10, 15 minutes, and no penalty was called. I just don't think that was a good call to make. It's a he said situation, and that could be a very bad strategy that a team has, because yes, they're required to tell the other team when it's time. Doesn't mean they did. You don't know. But either way, there's no consistency across the board when and why that one is called. And to call that in a playoff game after halftime when it can have a big impact, I think that was just a bad call. But, therein again, one of my other frustrations was towards the second half of the game, the game, or the fourth quarter especially, the game was starting to get really chippy. There was some really bad hits that had that potential for getting dangerous or injury-inducing. I didn't see the one that Nick Carlson did, but from what I was hearing, that one maybe should have been a major, not a minor. The one with Dan McRae, that one I think, in my opinion, should have been a major, and it was called a minor. And that's just that frustration. Like, be consistent, get control of the game. This was a playoff game, and I think they had bad refs doing it. That doesn't impact, that shouldn't impact the win or lose, but it's still a frustrating experience when you're seeing these things, and it's, that could have ended somebody's career that night. It could have impacted next week, and he's just, I don't think that was the right reffing team there, but that's a bit of a side note. So it was an interesting game. It was a lot closer than I was expecting, so that's always good. But I think Calgary just wanted it a little bit more at the end there. So I'm off my tirade now.
Okay. Well, that's all the games, obviously. There was only 2 of them. So next week we've only got 2 as well.
I've got one more comment on that game.
Go ahead, Donner.
It was Jeff Snyder actually left after the last face-off of the third quarter and said he walked down the tunnel screaming at his brother because did something to him. And he didn't return in the fourth quarter. They had Curtis Manning take all the face-offs. It was only 2 because there's only, plus the starting was 3 face-offs that quarter. And I haven't heard anything about him or any kind of update. He didn't tweet anything that I saw getting passed around. But to lose Jeff Snyder in the fourth quarter of the game, he's kind of a big emotional leader for the team, and they persevered. The Roughnecks did, and that's kind of an interesting sideline to see what happens going into next week.
Well, and that's also why a lot of people were saying that the hit that Dan McRae did was kind of a retaliatory shot for whatever happened with Jeff Snyder. But unfortunately, the way Calgary does things, we have shots of the fans instead, and you don't get to see that part of the game. But that just kind of goes back to the, as a ref, you're letting things slide all game, and then all of a sudden you start cracking down, or you're really stiff, and then you start loosening. It was getting, in my opinion, in that fourth quarter and towards the end of the third, it was just getting what I call dangerous chippy. You're seeing shots that are hitting the head that just aren't quite, they look a little more intentional and a little more force, and nothing's getting called, and So they just start getting more aggressive because they're trying to get the other team back in retaliation. It can get dangerous.
I did notice the announcers did mention something about the fact that Snyder was out in the fourth quarter. They obviously didn't know why. I guess they kind of asked their roving reporter to try and find out why, but nobody ever came up with an answer. And you would think when somebody of that caliber is removed from a game, or at least doesn't play in part of a game, there would be some explanation for it later, saying he wasn't feeling well, he tweaked his knee, he did something. But I'm with you, Tyler. I never saw anything, any explanation for why he wasn't there. Yeah, so we'll see how that affects things next week, as you said. Speaking of next week, Game 1 of the division finals goes in Buffalo and in Calgary. And so our predictions last week, we all missed the Toronto game, and Tyler also missed the Calgary game. So Tyler starts off the postseason at 0-2, and Melissa and I are 1-1. So getting into our predictions for this coming week, now I think now this is the way I've done it anyway. This is my prediction for the next game, not the next series. So Tyler, since you're at 0-2, I'll give you the opportunity to redeem yourself quickly, or first anyway.
All right. So we have Rochester at Buffalo, Game 1 of the Eastern Finals. I like Rochester. I mean, Buffalo kind of maybe pulled off the longest con ever to get 8 wins and then absolutely disappear and coast through the second half to then come out and get a win in the playoffs where everybody had written them off. But I don't think Rochester cares about that. Rochester knows who they're going up against, where they're playing at, their biggest rival just down the road. They'll be ready and get have them winning in Buffalo. For the second game of Edmonton at Calgary, I'm picking Calgary to take the momentum from the last game and had the home crowd and another little playoff party in Calgary, I think they'll want to call it. I do have the caveat that I'm picking this assuming that Jeff Snyder is healthy and his usual self. If he's not there, a total wild card change for me. But I can see Edmonton with a slight rust or whatever you would call it coming off a bye, and Calgary jumping on them at home, taking advantage of that environment that they're in, and sneaking out with the first win. Doesn't mean they'll necessarily get the series win. Give us a chance maybe to see the 10-minute playoff in action the following week for the first time. But I want Calgary to beat Edmonton on Saturday night. What about you, Melissa?
I had a pretty hard time picking these this week. With the buys that definitely is its own factor. And some teams definitely come off those, and they're well rested, and they come in and they're strong, and it's like they have all that momentum, and that cohesion, they just really rock it. Other times it's like they come off the bye, and it's like, oh yeah, I gotta play. It's like they just woke up from a nap type of. They just don't have that same cohesiveness and level of play that they did before the bye. So it's going to be interesting to see if that does have an impact for me. And so I found it hard to choose because especially with Buffalo, the way they played last week, it's like, oh my goodness, this is the team that we expected to show up, but where have they been for 8 weeks? With Calgary and Edmonton, I think that's going to be a tough game. These guys have already played, 4 times this season? This is game number 5, so there's definitely a lot of other factors that can take place in that one. So this is one that I really, really waffled on my decisions a lot. I'm going with Rochester over Buffalo for the same reason last week with Buffalo. They lost the second half of the season. It's really hard to have faith that team is going to, the good team is going to show up, not the one that kept losing. So even though I think Buffalo, if they play last week the way they did, I think Rochester's going to have their hands full, especially after the bye week. but I think I'm going to go with Rochester. For Calgary and Edmonton, that one again, it's just they played each other so much that Edmonton dominated, but Calgary did just beat them. So which of the two teams is going to show? Edmonton seemed like they were slacking the past couple of games, and maybe it was because they were looking forward to the playoffs and not really looking at the game they were playing that night, since it didn't matter. I don't know, but I'm going to go with Edmonton. So I'm erring on with both of those on the side of record and history versus how they're both just kind of playing right now. So I may regret that next week, but that's that's what I'm going with. What about you, Graham?
Uh-oh, where is Graham? Oh,
We just lost
bummer, he
Graham.
dropped.
Well, while we wait to see if we do get Graham back, um, I was thinking it might be fun to talk about some of our favorite playoff memories. So, do you have any you want to throw out there, Tyler?
Yeah, I've actually got, I would say, several playoff memories. I made it a point to try and make it to every Stealth playoff game that they've had. And the only time I missed one was in 2011. They had to go on the road for the whole playoffs. 2011 they had to go on the road for playoffs. So they played at Minnesota, not Calgary, and I had skipped those. That's kind of a memory I have. But I also got to see games in Calgary a couple times, Colorado, Arizona, Toronto. Great stuff, and in Everett and Seattle. Two biggest memories I have are talked about earlier, the Colorado game in '07 when San Jose Stealth got their first ever playoff victory. It was an overtime game. Jeff Wicke scores. It was incredible because Pepsi Center, 19,000 people just dead silent while my wife and I are jumping up and down celebrating. And then the other one would be the 2010 playoff run. It's easy to say the playoff victory, the championship victory, but also I think more importantly in that season was the OT game against Edmonton, and they had to move the game to Key Arena because of a schedule conflict. Goes to OT and was over in 8 seconds. Just Jameson Kester did face-off, pulled it straight back. Rabel's off to the races, and it was just everybody's momentum was going towards the ball. Rabel goes this way, and he's just by everybody. Throws one fake. Matt Disher's laying on the ground, just watching the ball go over, and just everybody went nuts. One of the coolest moments. Stealth mobbed Rabel, and it was probably my favorite Rabel moment with an indoor period, and that was my two favorite memories that I can remember. How about you, Melissa?
Those are definitely some pretty awesome memories. Little quick break. Graham just told us that his network has completely gone down, so he has no internet, so he will not be joining us again. So for his picks, real quick, he had Buffalo, which I would have loved to have heard his rationale on, and then he went with Edmonton. So we're all a little bit different this week, so next weekend's going to be kind of fun. As for my playoff memories, that's definitely tough. We haven't had as many home playoff games, so I haven't been able to go to them as much. In fact, I've only done a couple of road trips, and they were usually mid-season. But my first playoff memory is definitely one of my favorite and one of the best, in my opinion, just because it was that first year when we were playing against, I want to say it was against Calgary. No, we played Calgary the next week and lost. Oh, who was it? It was we played against Dwight Metke was in net. Oh, it was against the Vancouver Ravens. That's who it was. Dwight Metke was in net, and it was just we had just glass seats right by the goal line, and it was just quite the experience because that was our very first season, and so we're still trying to figure out where we would even want to sit because we're like, okay, we're getting season tickets after this. And just having those glass seats in the playoff game, and the Ravens were a tough team, and just Langtree with his just side diving goals that he is so well known for, his highlight reel goals, and it's the only time I've ever seen a goalie get a penalty. It was until more recently when it was a little more common, but that was it was crazy. The Pepsi Center was going absolutely nuts. I thought there was going to be a mob if they didn't put Metke in the the box, because what had happened is Langtree had done a dive across the crease and landed in the net, and Metke just started just spearing down with his stick, really hard. It was very dangerous situation, and it was a little overboard, and so they were calling it a 10-minute major, but they weren't going to make him sit. And when the ref announced that, just the Pepsi Center lost it, and they couldn't even get the game started because the crowd had gotten